Welcome to Pyramid Parent Talk. I'm Lynn Farlow.
And I'm Karen Harper Royal.
We're parents with Pyramid Community Parent Resource Center, providing information and support to parents of children with special needs in New Orleans. Pyramid Community Parent Resource Center. At Pyramid Community Parent Resource Center, we provide one-to-one assistance workshops on special education, the special education law, positive behavior support, and advocacy skills. You can reach us on the web at www.pyramidparentcenter.org or follow us on Twitter at PyramidCPRC or just call our helpline at 504-899-1505. Today we're discussing the behavior challenges of children with disabilities. If you want to join the discussion, call us at 504-260-9265. Karen, as you know, many of our calls come from parents about children with challenging behaviors. That brings me back to my daughter's experience in school, especially during the middle school years. I used to get many calls to come and pick her up from school because of her big behaviors. My daughter has autism, and with autism, a lot of time you have difficult behaviors. So the staff at school found it difficult to deal with her, and their answer to dealing with her was calling me at home. And I know many of our parents experienced that.
Absolutely. Actually, it's behavior that got me into education advocacy from the very beginning, going way back to when my son was in kindergarten. He was, I always tell people, he couldn't sit at circle time. He was always being put outside of the classroom or sent to the library. Now, we were very fortunate that it was a school that didn't believe in hassling parents and calling us all the time. So I didn't get the calls, and he was never suspended. But I was very concerned that he was not in class learning, and it was then that I quit my job and started going to school every day to try to make school work for him. But, as you said, we have lots of parents who call us, and I know most of the calls that I get are from parents whose children are having some kind of behavior issues in schools, and schools are sometimes telling parents that the child can't go on a field trip unless the parent comes, and then we have those repeated calls where the school wants the parent to come take the child home early.
So that means that our parents are suffering, because how can you pick up your child every day from school and work at the same time?
And you can. Many of our parents end up not being able to hold on to a job. And it's very important for parents to know that, number one, you do not have to pick your child up just because the school calls, especially if they are not suspending your child. What parents should ask is this a suspension? And if it is a suspension, ask for the paperwork. And what happens a lot is that parents feel that something really bad is going to happen to their child if they don't go get the child. So I definitely understand the heartache that a parent goes through.
And speaking of that, I was on the phone last week with a parent who I was telling her, hey, if they're calling you all the time, if this is not a legitimate suspension, you don't have to pick your child up. Well, she said, no, I have to get him, because if I don't get him, the police bring this child to the house. So she rushes to go and get her child.
In situations like that where this kind of thing is happening, it's going to take us as parents retraining schools on how to treat our children. If the police are being called for a child with a disability over and over again because you don't come pick the child up, this is a clear example that there is something wrong in the IEP. The IEP and the behavior plan is not adequate to meet the child's needs. Parents should not tolerate this kind of behavior from the school with the police being called for their child. And that's when it is important for us as parents to make a written request for a reconvening of the IEP.
What if they don't have an IEP?
Well, if this is like in the early stages, such as what I was going through, my child didn't have an IEP, these repeated behavior issues are indications that an IEP may be needed. So then parents should be making a written request for an evaluation, because all of those behavior reports, those phone calls, and parents should keep track of all of that. Always keep a notebook and put the date, the time, and what the nature of the call was whenever the school is calling you. That way you're documenting the frequency of the problem. Because a lot of times schools will say, well, not a child, he doesn't need an IEP, it's not that bad. But then when you show up there with your documentation, you can see that everybody will be able to clearly see that there is clearly a problem, and the school has a responsibility under the federal special education law to investigate the situation and do an evaluation if these problems persist.
And also, shouldn't they write a letter even before they make that request for that initial evaluation? They can write a letter documenting, hey, I noticed these type of behaviors in my child and I'm concerned. So at least the school is on notice that.
Well, that's a really good point that you're making, Lynn, because that also helps the parent to put some safeguards in place for their child, because by writing that letter about your concerns about the challenging behaviors, puts the school on notice. And in that letter, again, say, I want my child evaluated. So then if there is a major incident and the school wants to expel your child, then you actually have documentation that the school has knowledge of the child's behavior issues and that you have made a request for an evaluation. So then some of the special education safeguards and protections come into play, even though your child is not yet identified as a child having special needs. And some of those protections will help keep the school from railroading your child out of that school, but it also helps to get the school on the right track and providing the right kinds of supports that the child may need. But you don't need an IEP to get a behavior plan put in place.
Absolutely, because as I'm thinking about Jade's experience with her behavior and the plans we would put in place, I'm thinking of two things. I'm thinking that we definitely needed the behavior intervention plan, and have that discussion about what things would happen. Look at the major behaviors of concern, and also I was thinking about the IEP. I would always request in the IEP additional training for all of the staff around behavior, and I thought that was always important for her.
Well, that's always a good thing, because a lot of times some of the children's behaviors are spawned on by the adult not behaving properly. One of the things I always tell parents is to make sure that if you know you have a child with some stubborn behaviors, make sure that everybody who's working with that child has been trained in CPI, crisis prevention measures, so that they know how to properly restrain a child before things get out of hand.
And shouldn't all staff at school that work with children who have behaviors, shouldn't they be trained in CPI?
They should be, so that we don't run into mistakes of, school personnel improperly handling a child. There have been some, situations where that's happened, or they go to the other extreme and they just always want to keep calling the police in there. I know you remember a few years back when one of the schools had like a little 6-year-old child handcuffed at school. Now, I know that sometimes children could have some serious behaviors, but I can't imagine that something's going on with a 6-year-old that is so bad that a school would regularly employ using a police officer with handcuffs.
And when you have a proper behavior intervention plan that's looked at regularly, you'll find that it works. If everybody is on the same page, that plan works. And then if some other behaviors come up that you need to address, then you get a new plan.
Right, and if the plan isn't working, parents need to know. Call for a new meeting so the plan can be tweaked. A lot of times schools will put incentives in that the child doesn't care anything about, and so the plan simply doesn't work. And nobody needs to waste time having something on paper that's not working for the child. From my experience, and I know from your experience, if you have the right supports in place, the child's behavior changes. And so one key to knowing if you don't have the right supports is if you continually have the same kinds of problems over and over again. that is a serious clue that the behavior plan is not adequate to meet the needs of the child.
That's correct. So why don't we talk about some of the things that a parent needs to know regarding behavior and discipline? Because there's things that they need to know.
Well, one of the things I always tell parents is to make sure that you read the school's student and family handbook or the discipline policies. There should be a certain section of that policy that specifically addresses children with special needs. Sometimes schools want to act like it's all one policy, that there's no special rules, but there are indeed some very specific rules for children with special needs. A lot of times people have the erroneous idea that children with disabilities can't be suspended.
That's right.
Children with disabilities absolutely can be suspended for up to 10 days in the school year. It doesn't have to be consecutive days. This is 10 days across the whole school year without regard to whether or not whatever they did wrong was related to their discipline, to their disability. So a lot of times people use the excuse that they just let those children with special needs do whatever they want. It's not true. I mean, we know that because we get parents calling us all the time of children who have been suspended. But schools can suspend them for up to 10 days throughout the whole school year. So those 10 days don't have to be all, consecutive, all in a row. But if Johnny is fighting all the time and he gets a 3-day suspension here, a 5-day suspension there, or 8 days the next time, we've already gone over the 10 days for things that are all similar behavior issues. But after that 10th day, the school must do something called a manifestation determination review.
And you might hear it as an MDR
right.
at school.
Right. And so when they do the MDR, the manifestation determination review, they are looking to see if the child's behavior is related to his or her disability. And if it is not related to the disability, then they can continue to go on and suspend the child. But if it is related to the disability, before they remove the child from their educational placement, they have to reconvene at IEP. They have to redo the behavior plan, and even if they do move the child to an interim alternative placement, another placement somewhere else, that could be within the same school, or it could be an alternative school or an alternative program somewhere else. They must make sure that the educational services in that IEP continue. All of those supports and services you get, whether it's occupational therapy, speech therapy, special instruction in the IEP, all of those things must continue, even, if they determine that they do need to move the child out of the school.
And what if, because I know we've been in IEPs where parents, where the school have found that they determine that the behavior is not a result of the disability, but the parent disagrees.
Well, parents have an appeal right. Again, all of this information should be in the student family handbook, and it's certainly written up in IDEA law. I often recommend that people get the Rights Law handbook, and they can go to Rights Law, WRIGHTSLAW.com, rightslaw.com. And one of the things I love about Rights Law is that it very clearly tells you what your rights are and what your right of appeal is. And parents should quickly write a letter of appealing the placement decision. But the thing to remember is that the child will be in that alternative placement until the appeal has been heard.
And also, I guess I was thinking about some of the reasons why your child might be put in an alternative placement. Talk about some of those reasons.
Well, if it was related to drugs, drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, weapons, a dangerous weapon as defined by the United States Code, and not, it can't just be any old dangerous weapon. But also the other thing is serious bodily injury. A lot of times they say they want to remove the child because he hit the teacher.
So let's use my daughter as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So part of her behaviors is pinching and scratching, and she would do that a lot.
Well, let me just read to you what the definition of serious bodily injury is. Serious bodily injury means bodily injury which a substantial risk of death. Last time I checked,
Pinching
didn't cause death, right? Extreme physical pain. So, I could hit you right now, you're going to be hurting. But it has to be like extreme physical pain. Pinching hurts, but it's not extreme physical pain. Protracted and obvious disfigurement. So she maybe would have to pinch her ear off.
Right.
Or, so it doesn't have to be all these things, but protracted loss or impairment of the function of a bodily member, organ, or mental faculty. So, like if she broke her finger off, or, cut her leg off, cut her ear off, or whatever. So, extreme bodily injury is a very serious definition.
So, when we have parents who are sitting in meetings and they use serious bodily injury, the parents need to know this. So that they can have this discussion inside of that meeting.
Well, you know what we say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. And so, that's why I love this book, because, you see it had my little tabs on it and everything. It definitely defines what serious bodily injury is. So it's not just in legal talk. It helps you to be able to learn what your rights are and implement hold the school accountable for adhering to your rights.
So we did serious bodily injury. We talked about controlled substances.
Right.
What else?
Oh, and weapons. Weapons is another thing. A lot of times people want to just kick a child out because they, maybe did something with a pencil. But it really has to be a weapon. And, parents just need to definitely know what this means.
And Karen said that you can find this information in rights law. You also can go to NICHY.org and find this information, which is NICHY.org. And you'll find a lot of good information on everything. But if you just put in discipline under IDEA, they'll have that information for you.
Absolutely. And now, so when parents find that, schools are constantly calling them and they feel like they're not getting anywhere, I just want to caution parents, don't take your child out of the school. We have so many parents who are just removing their children. But they definitely need to give us a call at Pyramid. And I just want to repeat our helpline number, which is 504-899-1505. Get in touch with us at Pyramid so that we could help you talk through what's going on and try to make sure you have the right tools for dealing with the school. But changing schools should be your last resort, because one of the things we found out this school year is that certain charter schools actually are using their discipline policies to push out children with disabilities. And that is a problem. Our children with disabilities are not being served very well. And I used to think it was just because the schools didn't know how to serve them. That doesn't give them an excuse. But when I found out that some of the schools do this on purpose, but what, this also brings up another very important point with charter schools that parents need to be aware of. Just because they have certain behavior programs in place does not mean that they have to follow that to a T for your child. I know there's a school that has a paycheck system in place. And this child with a disability was never earning his paycheck. So it wasn't working for him. because he has an IEP, the school had an obligation to adjust their existing behavior program to fit the needs of the child.
And what that school was doing was setting that child up for failure.
Right, and parents need to be on the lookout to see if their child is being set up for failure.
Now, I know we've heard many stories where they'll say that the parent has to come on the field trip with that child.
Right.
Should they be doing that?
No, the parent should not have to come out. A lot of times parents want to go just to make sure things are going to go okay. But if you can't make it, your child should not be denied access to that field trip. The field trip support is something that the school should put in place, whether they have to hire a para-educator to go to make sure that they keep tabs on the child. But parents should not tolerate their children being eliminated from field trips just because they are a child with a disability or challenging behaviors.
And let me share this. When my daughter was in school, she had extra support on field trips because it was hard for her to go on field trips. So she had the additional support.
So I see we have our first caller, Miss Cheryl.
Yes.
Hi, Miss Cheryl. What's going on?
I was listening to your station, and I have that same problem with my son in his school.
Which problem was that?
About the behavior, and every little thing he do, they write him up and want to suspend him and put him out of school.
Does your child have an IEP?
No, I heard about it in the beginning of in elementary school, but I haven't heard about it since.
How old is he?
13.
13. And he's still having lots of big behavior issues at school?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, what I would recommend is that you just write a little short letter. Make sure you put a date on it, and tell the school, I continue to get negative behavior reports for my son. Describe what some of the behaviors are, and ask them to evaluate him so that to see if he would qualify for additional supports.
Right.
And even if he doesn't qualify for additional supports, you need to ask them for a behavior intervention plan. Tell them that, whatever we're doing to help his behavior isn't helping, and we need to sit down and together write up a behavior intervention plan. And that should begin with something that's called a functional behavior analysis, an FBA.
Right.
Because once they do that FBA, they can figure out what is triggering the behavior.
Right.
And then from that, they should have enough information with you present at the table, because you know your child too, and this should be a collaborative meeting with the parent and the teachers, where y'all come up with some things to try to see if we could get the child's behavior on track. And then if the child does qualify for special education services and gets an IEP, the behavior support should be written into that IEP document also.
Okay.
But as a parent, you're going to have to push the school to do what they should do. And federal law requires that they look into this. They can't just write you off and dismiss you like you don't have any rights.
Right.
And also, Ms. Cheryl, if you want more information, if you want us to assist you further, please call our helpline. It's 504-899-1505.
And,
okay.
Also, we have a meeting coming up on July 16th. It's our workshop. It's a 2-part workshop on positive behavior supports, because chances are you may be having some behavior issues at home too. And what we do in our positive behavior support workshop, and like I said, it's a 2-part workshop. We teach parents how to work with their child so that we could start eliminating some of those challenging behaviors.
Right.
And so that workshop is going to be on July 16th. What's that, next Tuesday?
That's next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday at
the Rosa Keller Library.
The Rosa Keller Library over on Broad Street. But if you want to go to that workshop, definitely call our helpline at 504-899-1505 and register for the workshop, by giving us your name, contact information, because we need to have at least 5 parents coming to the workshop if we don't get 5 people coming, then we don't actually do it. But you can definitely still call us continue to call us with questions and, just to make sure you're on the right track with trying to resolve this issue with the school.
Okay. That's great.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All
Bye-bye.
right, bye-bye.
All right, that was a great example of, the kinds of problems that parents have with behavior. And she, her child didn't even have an IEP, right?
Right. And a lot of times, and, he's 13. By the time a child gets to be that old and they've had these same kinds of behavior problems, and a lot of times it happens as soon as they enter school, they have missed a lot of learning. And then because they have missed a lot of learning, that also makes them act up more.
Right.
So it becomes a vicious cycle, and that's why it's important to catch this early on. Don't think it's just going to get better in the next year or the next year.
And as you were saying that, I thought about a lot of reasons why my daughter had her behaviors. And she has autism, so a lot of times people with autism have a hard time. That's one of the main features of autism, just the difficulty in communication. So if you don't have a way of communicating, then you have behaviors. You're frustrated.
Well, and that's why I always say that parents have to become the expert in what's going on with their child. My sons have attention deficit disorder. Your daughter has autism. Some people's kids have something called intermittent explosive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar, whatever it is. Even learning disabilities have an impact on behavior. Whatever it is, parents must make themselves the expert. Read everything you can. Talk to the professionals, doctors and psychologists about what's going on and how to remedy the situation so that when you do go to the table with the school and to try to write up a behavior plan, you go there armed with real information. Because it's sad to say, these schools will send you on a wild goose chase because they don't know how to deal with your child's behaviors.
I was thinking about another phone call. This particular child has bipolar, and the mom called to find out, where's the school? What school can I put my child?
Well, let me just be clear. There is no particular school that I know of operating in Orleans Parish that is the expert on behavior. You have a right to have your child at whatever school you want them at and they get accepted. But a lot of times they tell you that, this school over there is better for children like yours. I haven't found that place that is a better place. So
it doesn't exist?
I don't think it exists. It's better to just work it out where you are.
So in order to work it out, you need to know your rights, and you need to be armed with the information. So wrapping up, what we want you to know is on Tuesday, as Karen mentioned before, July 16, we're having a positive behavior support workshop at the Rosa Keller Library at 4300 South Broad from 10 to 3. And our next radio broadcast is Tuesday, July 23rd at 2 o'clock. And with that broadcast, we'll be talking about the strategies that you use in positive behavior support.
And I know we'll talk a lot more about this, but while we're talking about the challenging behaviors, a lot of times schools will say they have PBS, or positive behavior support, and all they're talking about is a token economy system where a kid gets something for being good. And when we do this two-day workshop, we teach parents that that's not exactly all that there is to positive behavior support, and in many cases it can actually set the child up for failure.
Right. So that's what's coming up, and we want you to know that at Pyramid, you are never alone.